Hello, family. My name is Pierre Saget. My wife Shara and I lead one of the 6 regions of the Dallas-Fort Worth Church. And today I have the privilege of sharing a few thoughts about what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 6, verse 5 through 8. Let's read it together. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. You know, there are usually 3 thoughts that comes to mind for me when I read this section of the Sermon on the Mount. The first one is that prayer is an important part of my relationship with God. You know, Jesus expressed his thoughts here in saying, and when you pray, meaning that there is an expectation that as I walk with God, I will be praying, talking with him on a regular basis. And it reminds me that God wants to hear from me. Secondly, I think about what Jesus is saying here when he's basically explaining that the length of my prayers is not what determines whether or not God will hear me or will take into consideration what I bring to him. You know, I don't need to take time to catch him up on the situations in my life. Truth of the matter is, he knows all of these situations probably in more detail than I do. And so the length of our prayers is not what determines whether or not God hears us. And then thirdly, I think about the fact that Jesus commands us not to make a show out of praying. You know, in other words, not to make an event for us to have attention be brought onto us. You know, the goal is to speak to our Father in heaven with sincerity and honesty. I used to think maybe before this last week or so, I used to think, you know what, I don't have a problem with this. You know, I'm not really the type of person that makes a show out of praying, at least not in this very overt way that I understand it when I read this passage. But I've stopped and I thought about it last week, you know, and you probably can relate to this, where there's times where you're praying in a group with other brothers and sisters. And I find myself, you know, when the person before me is praying, I have a tough time focusing on what they're praying and talking to God about, because I'm so preoccupied with, okay, well, what will I be praying about? And if I'm honest about it, the truth is, when I get to that point, yeah, I'm trying to collect my thoughts, but, you know, a lot of it is more about being concerned about how I sound and how I appear. And so that's something that, you know, even right now, this day in my life, I am reaping or understanding from reading the Sermon on the Mount over again in my life. So let's continue to march on the Mount.